Well, again, there are biblical principles for that. If we see a brother or a sister sinning and we recognise a sin, often they may not see that they're sinning themselves, or perhaps they've got used to their sin. It's right and appropriate we take that up with them personally and challenge them about that sin. So our friends, relatives and others need to be willing to speak and raise their concerns and to challenge and to rebuke where necessary. Now, that's often a very difficult thing to do because it's painful. We're reluctant to do that because we don't want to challenge those that we love. But instead, we need to recognise that it is actually the most loving thing to do, to challenge those sins. And it's absolutely crucial that sin be challenged at an earlier stage. If it's not challenged at an earlier stage, then it becomes more and more difficult to challenge. And the sort of extent of repentance that will be necessary becomes greater and greater. So friends, family and others around, and the formal accountability structures that might be in place for the leader, need to be prepared to lovingly ask hard questions, and if they see things which are concerning them, to pick them up with the individual at as early a stage as possible. And if the leader doesn't respond to that rebuke or that challenge, or doesn't give satisfactory answers, then there's a need to bring others in on that process. So again, Jesus in Matthew chapter 18 says, if a brother sins against you, try to deal with it individually, but if you can't, take somebody else with you. And then if it still can't be dealt with at that level, take it to the church as a whole. So there's a biblical principle that it's not just the first personal conversation, but if the sin issue is not being addressed there, then you need to bring other people in as well, because it's crucially important that the sin is dealt with and isn't allowed to escalate. And the reason that's so important is some sins ultimately will perhaps lead to a loss of ministry and a loss of leadership and great discredit to the gospel. So we need to be willing to intervene, be willing to ask those hard questions for the sake of the individual, but also for the sake of the glory of Christ and the honour of the gospel.